Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to replace the head gasket on your lawn tractor with a Briggs & Stratton engine. Now it's the Briggs & Stratton 15.5 horsepower single cylinder engine. The reason why I'm replacing the head gasket is because it's burning oil like crazy, and oftentimes what happens is the head gasket blows between the valve lifter galley and the cylinder. So I'm going to take it apart, replace that. Hopefully that will fix the problem. So might as well get started. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the hood and the front end so I can access the head a lot easier. Now on this tractor, all I have to do is remove the two bolts on each side over here. It may be different on your tractor, so just start by removing the bolts on each side, then the whole front end will come off. And by the way, on this tractor I have to remove two bolts underneath it as well. So I'm going to remove the hood first. Once you've got this part all loosened up, you have to disconnect the lights. And it's just a little plug over here that you just disconnect. And now as you can see, it's going to be a lot easier to work on that engine. Now what you need to do is remove the two bolts over here, and for this you'll need a 3/8 socket. And you'll have to remove another bolt over here. It's a 3/8 as well, and there's another one on the other side just around the corner here. For this I'm going to use a ratcheting wrench. And the other bolt's just over here. Now if you look over here, there's a 1/4 inch bolt. I'm going to remove it so that the dipstick comes off the cowling. Now I'm going to remove the plastic cover that covers the starter gear. And for this you'll need a 1/4 inch socket as well. And there's another bolt over here. And now the whole cowling should come right off. At this point I'm going to remove the carburetor intake pipe, and for this you can use a 3/8 socket. A 10mm socket may work as well. Now the intake pipe is going to come off. The carburetor is attached to it, so I'm just going to leave it on the side like this. Now I'm going to remove the exhaust manifold, and for this you're going to need a T45 torx bit. So I'll just pull the spark plug wire out. And this is what I'm removing. There's a bolt here and there's one underneath over here. And the gasket's coming out, as you can see. And now you can just pull it right out. Now I'm going to start removing the valve cover. There's 4 bolts, one in each corner, and they're 3/8. And the reason why there's a cardboard there is because sometimes when you take the cover off, there's oil that leaks, and a lot of it. So just to be safe, put a rag or a piece of cardboard there just to suck it all up. Now the cover is off. You can see the valve lifters and the rockers. Now I'm going to show you the two lifters for one important reason. As you notice, one's darker than the other, so make sure that when you reassemble your engine that you put the exact same push rod in the exact same spot. Now at this point here, it's time to remove the whole head, and to do this you need to remove all the 1/2 inch bolts that go around the head. For example, all these bolts over here, they all need to be removed. You can use an impact wrench to do this, or just a ratchet and 1/2 inch socket will do. Make sure you have an extension when you do this. They're not hard to remove. They come off really easy, as you can see. And if you look under here, there's bolts that need to be removed there as well. Once you break them off, you can loosen them by hand. As you can see, they're fairly long bolts. Just pull it out. So now that I have the head off, I'm going to show you what to look for to see if your head gasket is in bad condition and needs to be replaced. Okay, so somebody might look at the head gasket and think, well, it's not in that bad a shape. It's still there, it's still intact, but the telltale sign that there's something wrong with it is right here. Now, this specifically is blow-by. What's happening is the gasket is damaged right here, and this is a common thing on these engines that I see. And what's happening is a bit of oil from over here is somehow getting into the cylinder. So look for this. And you can tell that the engine's burning oil because the piston is full of carbon over here. That's going to need to be cleaned. And if you take a look at the head here, where the valves and the spark plug are, you can see that they're full of carbon. That's from oil. Look at the spark plug on that. I'm surprised that thing would even start. So now what I'm going to do is remove the head gasket and we'll take a look at it on the other side. And to do that, you can just grab it. Usually it's just going to come off. There may be a bit of residue that needs to be cleaned after. And here's what's happening on the side of the gasket where we saw the blow-by. There's parts of it missing. So what's happening is the compression is escaping through here. So at this point in the procedure, what needs to be done is everything needs to be cleaned. The cylinder, the head, the area where the gasket goes. All the valves here, replace the spark plug, and make sure that the surface over here is nice and smooth and clean. And again, don't mix up the two push rods. Remember that the darker one goes on top and the lighter one at the bottom. So now I'm going to remove them and I'll make sure to remember where they go. Now I've put the head in an old container here with some old gas. Now if you use old gas to clean your parts, be extremely careful because it could easily cause a major fire in your shop or outside. Never leave the cover uncovered if you're not going to be around to make sure it's safe. I'm only doing this because I have a lot of old gas to use and it does prevent a lot of dirt from going inside the parts washer. Then I can just discard everything. Now if you're doing this at home or in your shop, whatever, you can always use a paintbrush to clean all the dirt off the head. I'll show you how to clean the carbon a bit later on in a different way. I find that a paintbrush and old fuel works really well. And I'm also going to clean the valve cover in the same way as well. So I've got my parts cleaned up. Here's the valve cover and here's the head. I just basically cleaned the outside. I also used my air compressor when I did this. Always wear safety glasses if you're using any compressed air to clean parts. Now I'm just going to quickly show you how to clean the inside over here. I took the spark plug off, as you can see. Just a tip, by the way, if you think your engine's burning oil, take the plug out. If there's a lot of buildup on it like this, then it's definitely burning oil and there's a problem. Now to clean off all the carbon inside the head here, I'm going to use some little wire brushes. Got one like this, it's like a cup, and I have different sizes of brushes shaped like this. Now do not run these wire brushes on the surface where the gasket goes because you're going to scratch it up. It's going to damage it a bit. So just do on the inside over here with the wire brush. I'll show you later on how I'm going to clean the outside here where the gasket goes. So always wear safety glasses when you're going to do this. Now I'm just going to air blow that. You can always use a bit of engine cleaner to clean all the spots that are left. So I'm going to spray a bit of this all around where the gasket used to be. And I'm going to use a 400 grit piece of emery sandpaper. You can buy a gasket removal tool that goes on your drill from Snap-on to do this, but I don't have one at the moment. So what I'm going to do now is just sand this lightly. And with a bit of lubrication on here, it just works really good to clean it up. It's very important that it's clean, especially where the leak was. A bit of WD-40, liquid wrench, or penetrating oil will work just as well as this. The engine cleaner works good because it helps to remove the material that is left on there. And you want to make sure that there's no carbon left in between the valves and the head. So at this point I'm just going to repeat the same process on the engine part. So you can move the flywheel to bring the piston up and use the wire brush on the drill to clean this, but don't run the wire brush over here where the gasket goes. So the piston looks pretty clean right now. I'm going to spray a bit of engine cleaner where the gasket was. You can let it soak there for a while if you want. It's not necessary. And now with my 400 grit sandpaper, I'll just sand it clean. Just make sure you clean all around, especially in between here. And just repeat the process a few times. The purpose of my videos is to get the homeowner or the guy off the street that's never worked on an engine to be able to do it himself. So you don't need special tools to do this yourself at home. Now to finish off everything nice, make sure to wipe inside the galley over here and make sure there's no dust from the carbon coming off. and make sure everything's nice and dry. You don't want this part to be oily at all. You can also move the flywheel and wipe down in here. Make sure there's no carbon inside here. And this looks good to me. Now another tip before you reassemble your engine is move the flywheel until the piston is at bottom dead center like this. And examine the cylinder to make sure there's no scratches in it at all. If it's scored or anything like that, that could also be causing your engine to burn excessive amounts of oil or have really low compression and have no power. If your cylinder is smooth like this one, then you don't have to worry about your cylinder needing some repairs. Now at this point, I'm ready to start reinstalling the head gasket. And before I start the reinstallation, I'm just going to spend a few minutes here to explain to you a few tips about getting a head gasket for your engine. The best way to make sure you get the correct gasket for your engine is by going to your small engine shop with these numbers over here on the cowling. You need the model number, the type number, and the code. You can also probably get these gaskets online as well. But your engine may be different than this one. This one is a 15.5 horsepower engine. Yours could be a 14 or a 16, so the gasket may be different. The gasket that fits the 15.5 horsepower engine that I'm fixing today is part number 273280S from Briggs & Stratton. And before I install a new gasket, I always compare the new one with the old one just to make sure I've got the correct gasket. Just line it up like this. You can always take your old gasket to your local small engine shop to make sure you get the right one. That may save you a bit of time. Now what I'm doing today is I'm using an aftermarket gasket. Now you may be wondering why I'm doing that. It's not because it's cheaper. It's because I noticed on the aftermarket one made by Rotary, and if you want to match this gasket, it's Rotary part number 2311077, and it's for the same part number from Briggs, as you can see here. Now the reason why I'm using an aftermarket gasket is not because it's cheaper. What I've noticed is that it's a bit thicker where the previous gasket failed in between the galley and the cylinder over here. And I'll just show you the old gasket here. There you go. So I'm going to try it out. The quality seems really good in the Rotary aftermarket gasket. I do recommend them. Sometimes some aftermarket parts you gotta beware, but in this case it's really good quality. It would be a bit cheaper for you, and who knows, it may even outlast an OEM one. Now I forgot previously to show you to remove these little caps here, and I'm fortunate they didn't fall off while I was cleaning it. So take these off and put them in a safe place. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is install the head gasket. I'm just going to put it on the pins over here, and it'll just sit there for now. And now that the gasket's on, you want to grab the head in this position here and then line it up onto the cylinder block. And now you want to have at least a few bolts ready just to put them in to hold the head in place. And go all around the head and just snug the bolts on. Do not tighten them all up yet. I'll show you how to do that and torque them properly. And don't forget the bolts at the bottom. So now I've hand tightened them all around. Now it's time to get the torque wrench out and torque them properly. So what I've got here is a check chart. It gives you all the torque specs for different Briggs engines. It's the overhead valve single cylinder, and it gives me 220 inch-pounds for the torque of those bolts. Now my torque wrench is in foot-pounds, so I had to go online to convert inch-pounds to foot-pounds. And here's a place online. I'll try to put the link underneath this video when I'm done. So the 220 inch-pounds converts to 18.3 foot-pounds, so just set your torque wrench accordingly. Now when you go to tighten up the bolts on the head of your lawn tractor engine, you want to make sure you tighten up the bolts evenly. If you don't do that, you may still have problems with your engine. So what I'm going to do is tighten up bolts at one end of the head, then go down, then crisscross again, and so forth, just to make sure it's nice and even on there. I'm going to do this with the torque wrench, of course, and once it's all torqued right, then it's good. And remember, with your torque wrench, you only want to hear it click once. Once it clicks, just leave it. Don't keep pushing on it till it clicks again. So I'll start up here. The torque wrench hasn't clicked yet, so I'm going to go down to the next bolt. And I'm going to go in the top corner here, over here. It's not rocket science, you just want to make sure it's on even. Now I've got all my bolts snugged up, and I'm just going to repeat the process, but torque them this time. So I'm going to force until I hear a click on the torque wrench. And there we go. I'll do one at the bottom here. And it's torqued. So I'm all done torquing the bolts. If you don't have a torque wrench, it's not that tight, 220 inch-pounds. So just be careful. Just put them tight, but not excessively. Now at this point I'm going to put the little caps here on the valves. And now it's time to put in the push rods. And just remember that the rod that is more silver in color goes at the bottom, the darker rod goes at the top. And previously in the video I marked them with the letter F. That's to tell me that this is the front part of the rod. I just like to put them exactly the same way that they were when I took them apart. So I'm just going to shove the top rod in the hole up here. And you just want to slide it until you reach and you can feel that it's in the hole at the back, just like this. And it's the same procedure for the bottom one. And they're in. Now what you need is a T20 Torx tool like this, or screwdriver, and a 10mm wrench to fit on the bolt here, or nut. Now what you want to do is reach in and loosen the Torx screw down inside. And now loosen up the nut. The reason why I'm doing this is so that I can move the rocker arm onto the push rod over here and onto the valve on the left here. So I'm just going to snug it back here by hand just for now, because now I'm going to need to readjust the valves. And you're also going to have to repeat the same process here at the bottom. So what you want to do once it's loose is just slide the rocker arm like this. Now snug it by hand. And then we'll adjust them later on. The next step in this operation is to put the intake manifold back on for the carburetor. Now the gasket's still good on there. I'm not going to put anything on there. I'm just going to put it back on with the bolts, and that's it. So just line it up to the holes and put the bolts on. Make sure to tighten them up evenly. And you'll need your ratchet and a 3/8 socket. And that's good. Now I'm going to reinstall the exhaust manifold, and you want to put it in through the muffler like this. And don't forget the gasket that goes here in between the manifold and the engine. Have your bolts ready. And I put a bit of copper anti-seize on the bolts, so make sure it's lined up with the gasket as well. And the second bolt goes down here. I'm going to reach in with the Torx bit like this, and I'm just going to line up the gasket. And now I'll just tighten up both bolts. I don't have the torque specs for it, but just put it fairly tight. Again, it's a T45 Torx for this. So now at this point in the operation, it's time to adjust the valves. So on my spec sheet, it shows that the intake valve should be 3,007 inch and the exhaust 5,007 inch. Even if it's 3 or 4 each, it won't really matter. Now when I adjust the valves, what I do is I find the top dead center on the engine. You can just use a small screwdriver or something and find out when the piston is at the top and when the valves are shut. So if I move the flywheel now, you can see that the valves are moving, so it's not at top dead center on the compression stroke. You would have to do another revolution until both valves are shut. So now they're not moving, and you've got the full loose in the rocker arms. That's what you want to see. And I'll just put my Torx wrench through the spark plug hole here, and I'm going to feel when the piston's at the top. Go really slow if you do this, especially if you're not used to it. I'm just going to find out when the piston's at the top. You're going to feel it moving the wrench right up, and when it's right at the top, it's just going to stop your wrench from moving up or down. And now it's right at the top. The reason why I know that is because my wrench is not going forward out anymore. And if I remember correctly, the manual says to turn the flywheel 1/4 inch after this and then adjust your valves. So I think this is pretty good the way it is now. And before you start, you're going to need a feeler gauge like this. Now I'm going to set the intake at 3,007 inch and the exhaust at 4,007 inch, even though the manual said 5,007 inch. The reason why I'm doing this is because the engine is a bit worn out, and sometimes I find I have to close the gap a bit when they're a bit worn. Now the intake's the bottom one, so I'm going to put my gauge through here, You just want your gauge to be smooth like this in between the rocker arm and the valve. You don't want it to be tight or too loose. So surprisingly, it feels pretty good even though I haven't even made any adjustments to it yet. But since I want it just a bit tighter, I'm just going to turn this by hand. So I'm going to leave it approximately like this. And I'm going to leave the gauge in there while I tighten this up. Now to tighten this up properly, you need your 10mm wrench to hold the nut. That's to keep the proper adjustment that you just made. You're going to need your T20 Torx wrench. Go in here. Now I don't have the Torx specs, but it's just a few pounds. So don't over tighten it because you could break the nut over here. And now I'm just going to snug it. Just a bit like that. Now you want to feel the feeler gauge. You want it to be smooth like this. Now I'll move on to the exhaust valve, which is the top one. I'm going to put my gauge in here and you can see it's way too loose. As you can see, that's way too much clearance. So again, make sure that the Torx screw is loose. Reinsert your gauge. You can turn this by hand or with the wrench until you feel that the gauge is nice and snug in there like this. Oftentimes people have a hard time starting these engines and all it ends up being is the valve adjustment. If these get too loose, you will not be able to turn your engine over. You might even think that you need a new starter when actually you don't. So if you have an overhead valve single cylinder engine on your lawn tractor and it's hard to start, always check the valve adjustment, even if your tractor is only a year or two old. Sometimes they need to be done every year. And after you're done adjusting the valves, just turn the flywheel by hand. This will turn the engine. And you want to make sure that the valves are opening and closing as you see in here. And that looks good to me. Now at this point I'm going to install a new spark plug and I'm going to set the gap at around 0.30, just like this. And by the way, it's an RC12YC made by Champion. And don't forget to put the spark plug cap back on. Now it's time to reinstall the valve cover, and before I do this I'm just going to put a bit of RTV silicone gasket maker on the edge here. And this is what I'm using today. It's from Permatex. And now just smear a bit on there. You don't need too much. And I'll make sure that there's no oil left on the edge here where the gasket and the cover are going to go on. And you want to install it like this. And I'm just going to snug them on like this for now. And then I'm going to go around and tighten up the cover evenly. What I'll do is I'll tighten up the bolt in this bottom corner, then go on the top right, and then at the bottom here, and then this one. Now there's a few things left to put on the engine, but I'm a bit anxious to see if it runs, so what I'm going to do is just start it up the way it is without the cowling back on and the hood. Just want to see if it's at least going to run. And remember, if you start anything in your garage, make sure you have adequate ventilation. So I'm pretty happy with it so far. It sounds good, it runs good. Replacing just the head gasket may not always be the solution to your problem if it's burning excessive amounts of oil. Sometimes the valve guides are worn out. Now the last time I checked for valve guides for this engine, you had to buy the whole head, so that was pretty expensive. You may want to try to get a used head if that's the problem with your machine. But hopefully with your tractor, if you have this problem, all it is the head gasket like in this video. Most of the time when I replace the head gasket, it does fix that problem. Not always, but most of the time. So now what I'll do is put this cover back on. I did clean it with a degreaser. And another tip, if you see a lot of debris down here, you may want to clean that as well, because it does help the engine to cool better if it's clean like this. If there's a lot of debris, your engine's not going to cool properly. So what you want to do is just insert the whole cowling on top here, and you want to make sure the cowling goes in the tab here on the piece of metal that surrounds the engine. Now you want to grab the 2 bolts that are shaped like this, and they go at the front over here, so just line up the holes. Don't tighten them up yet. We have 2 bolts to put at the back, and it's easier to line up the cowling if these are still loose. And now there's 2 bolts like this that go at the rear of the cowling. So one will go right here, and the other right here. And now with my ratchet and a 3/8 socket, I'm going to go around and tighten up all the 4 bolts. And at the back here, I'll just use a ratcheting wrench. Now grab the 2 little bolts here. They're a 1/4 inch head, and you want to put back the starter gear cover. So you just want to insert it underneath like this, and put the 2 bolts back on. And then tighten up the 2 bolts. Do not over tighten these, because you could easily strip the threads. It's only tightening into sheet metal, which is on the cowling. Now you want to grab the last bolt you have left like this, and this is to secure the oil filler tube onto the cowling. And that last bolt goes right over here. You may have to move the dipstick a bit to line up the hole. Once you've got it in, just tighten it up. Again, don't over tighten it. So now I'm going to reinstall the front. And there's a bolt that goes down underneath here and one over here. And reach underneath with a 1/2 inch socket and tighten up the bolts. And there's another one on the other side over here. And now you'll need to reconnect the lights, and it's the connector down here. Now I'm going to reinstall the screw and the nut here at the bottom there. And do the same at the bottom on the other side. And I'm going to reinstall the hood with the bolts that are left. And for the hood, you need to put the bolt through here and line up the holes. And now with a 7/16 socket and a wrench, I'm going to tighten both bolts. So that's all there is, guys, to replacing the head gasket on your lawn tractor with a Briggs & Stratton overhead valve single cylinder engine. If you follow the procedures in this video, you're going to be able to do it, and I do recommend that after a week or 2, go back and retorque all the bolts that hold the head on, just in case they get a bit loose over time. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.